Very warm welcome to our brand new Kumekucha Weekend special. Your host Chris Kumekucha will be with you shortly. I am here just to give you a short introduction. Today we look at the life of a brave Kenyan editor, a legend, a man who defied the brutal dictator former President Daniel Arap Moi. As a side topic, we answer the question why the modern Kenyan journalist is so boring. You will find this week's weekend special engrossing. Guaranteed. Over to your host Chris Kumekucha.
The way a newspaper works, the ideal model of a newspaper, is that to get a popular newspaper, you have exclusive stories, which the other newspapers don't have. Yeah, screaming headlines, which the other people don't have. Insider information, captivating features. Yeah, something that actually you cannot get in any other newspaper. And then, of course, accuracy of information. Yeah, because there's no point of having screaming headlines. Exclusives which are not factually accurate. You build your popularity on this, and then the advertisers come, or then you're able to get advertising to the newspaper. But then you're careful to keep your balance of advertising, so that the newspaper does not look like it has been purchased by advertisers. Yeah, and that's how you continue. And by the way, a popular daily newspaper is really a license to print money. It's a high volume cash business, and the cash comes in every day in cash, not checks, because people buy newspapers using cash. Yeah, mostly, apart from the subscribers, of course. And this is how the nation grew from its founding in 1960, yeah, when there was the only other major newspaper in the country was the Mzungu Standard. Yeah, they grew and overtook the Standard using this simple but very effective formula. Now, the height of the success of this formula was under the editorship of a man called George Mbugus. George Mbugus took over as managing editor of The Nation in 1983. Yeah. During his reign at the helm, the newspaper hit circulation figures that had never before been seen in East and Central Africa. And it was not an accident. The man had really extraordinary skills and an extraordinary ability to smell a story that would sell a newspaper. Now, to understand this era and to understand this story better, we need to contrast the old journalist and the new journalist. Okay? The old journalist who was still around in the era of George Mbugus, and the new journalist we have in the newsroom today. The typical old journalist was a hard-drinking, chain-smoking guy. Yeah? Not dressed very well. They would usually come late to the office, around 10:30, yeah, with a terrible hangover, yeah, from the previous night. But oh my, could this old journalist smell a story? Hey. What kept them on the job was their ability to produce extraordinary stories that sold the newspapers, that kept readers captivated, and that made a habit of very many Kenyans of feeling there's something wrong if they did not purchase a copy of the Daily Nation that morning. They just had to, and the person responsible was this old journalist. Now, most of these people, in fact, virtually all these old journalists did not have university degrees. Many of them were teachers, yeah, who had been attracted into the journalism profession, and all of them were trained in-house. Yeah, the way to train a journalist in those days is a typical British way. You're an apprentice. Yeah, you come in, you learn the trade, you start with small stories, and then you build up your career from there, learning the trade as you work. Now, most of these fellows lived in estates with the ordinary Kenyans, Eastlands, such and such places, Madare, Kibra, yeah, places where ordinary folks were. And they were able to look at life from the eyes of an ordinary Kenyan. Okay? Contrast that to the modern journalist, a university graduate, living in some upper high-income estate, straight from university. Maybe they've gone through school, they have not seen life. Yeah, they don't really know what happens to ordinary Kenyans. How do you expect them to communicate and produce a newspaper that will be attractive to the vast majority of Kenyans? Impossible. Yeah, it's as simple as that. Now, the daily drinking definitely was not good for their health. The chain smoking was not good for their health. But it meant that they mixed with people, ordinary people. They were out there drinking in seedy bars all over the place. And this is the places where they got news leads. These are the places where they got leads for stories that these days you will never see in a newspaper, because there's no way a polished, tie-wearing, suit-wearing journalist, yeah, who even when they talk to somebody they interview, is at pains to impress them how intelligent they are. Instead of getting information, they're trying to impress the person they interview. Yeah, those kind of journalists can never get those kind of stories. Now, amazingly, George Mbugu started out serving tea right at the birth of the Daily Nation newspaper. Okay, in the early days. Okay, he had very limited formal education. Yeah, he did not go beyond primary school. Okay, but he got into a newspaper and started out serving tea, and got an interest in the profession, and gradually climbed and became editor of Taifa Leo. This was the Swahili version of the Nation. Now, it is said that Bugus had no other interest in life except being a newspaperman. His whole life was just newspapers. Indeed, there are stories told of how he would go and leave. You know, he'd be forced, Bwana Bugus, Bwana, you just have to go and leave. So he would go on a short leave, maybe 2 weeks or more. And then the strange thing, he'd always wander around back to the newspaper room. Yeah, he'd always wander around back into the newsroom. Yeah, and he'd start poking his nose and he'd say, "Hi guys, what's a splash?" Of course, the splash is a headline of the newspaper. Yeah, that's the jargon used. Yeah, so he would ask what the splash for the next day was. That is how involved in the newspaper business the man was. Now, the other important thing to note is that these journalists were operating under very difficult circumstances. Yeah, there was no new constitution like we have today, which protects freedom of the press. There were a lot of crazy things which used to go on. The government was very, very draconian. But even in those circumstances, these journalists could not be stopped from being journalists. Now, let me give you a very interesting story that involved Mbugus. Now, in the 90s, there was this clergyman called Timothy Njoya, who made a very hard-hitting statement at the government. Yeah, and of course the nation, having its nose in the ground and knowing what the vast majority of Kenyans felt, printed a splash, a headline story concerning what Njoya had said. Now, of course, Bwana Mbugu was a very intelligent man, knew that the consequences would be dire. Now, usually when there was a sensitive story, what Mbugus would do is lock his office and tell his secretary to tell everybody he was not in. Okay, and of course he would not answer his phone. And then what would happen, he would communicate with his secretary and the outside world, yeah, using notes slipped under the door of his office, yeah. So you can imagine cops are looking for the man, yeah. He's not in the office because the secretary says he's not in, his office is locked. He's not at home, he's not in his house. Where is this man? Meanwhile, he was just locked up inside his office. Now, I need to tell you, I had the pleasure and the honor of meeting George Mbugus in person. Yeah, so I'm not talking about somebody I've read about in history books. Yeah, that's the advantage you have on this channel. Now, back to the Njoya story. Now, things got so hot, yeah, that Bwana Mbugus fled the office, okay? And he went into this usual drinking joint of his in somewhere in Gara, yeah. And those days there were no mobile phones. So he was communicating via call box. You know where you used to put coins and then you make a call? So he was communicating with his office via call box, yeah, and giving all instructions via the call box. So I can imagine something, a conversation going like this. The secretary telling him, "Yes, they have been here, several policemen, they're looking for you." And then Bwana Mbugu is saying over the phone, "Okay, this is what I want you to do, the splash tomorrow." Okay? Now, with that kind of communication, Mbugu's organized for the next day's newspaper. Now the next day's newspaper carried a rejoinder from the Kanu party, Mama na Baba, where they castigated Njoya and what he had said the day before. And Mbugu's, from this bar somewhere in Gara, gave instructions exactly what the headline was going to say, and so on and so forth, where to put the pictures. And that splash was carried. Now the next day, Bwana Mbugu's knew he was in trouble and he knew that he cannot hide forever. Yeah, and so he came out, dressed smartly, and went to see the permanent secretary at that time in the office of the president, Bwana Hezekiah Oyugi. Now the story goes Bwana Mbugu's had already left instructions because he knew that he was going into detention at the worst, yeah, or at the very best he would be locked up in some police cell for a number of days. So he had come prepared. And so when he walked into Oyugi's office, Oyugi told him, "Oh, we have been looking for you. In fact, you're very lucky because Mzee is very happy with the story you published today, the rejoinder, rubbishing what Njoya had said yesterday. So Mzee is very happy. So there's no problem. You just go back to the office. Hiyo maneno imeisha." Now you'd think after such an encounter, Bwana Mbugu's would cool down. But no way, this was a journalist. So the very next day, the very next week, he was on to another sensitive story, another sensitive big story that would sell the newspaper. And usually you would get these stories fast, yeah? And the nation circulation climbed steadily, higher and higher, until it hit the record, yeah, which I believe is still the record in newspaper publishing in Kenya, when it published a headline, "Biwott arrested." Yeah, that was sometimes in the early 90s. And the newspaper that day sold 330,000 copies. Now, that was some serious cash even in those days. Very serious cash to make on one day. Yeah. Now, Mbugu's left the nation in 1991, yeah, to make room for the corporate boys to enter the newsroom, yeah, where now you'd get non-journalists making journalistic decisions, yeah, because the overhead chief executive office of the Nation Group, okay. And he went and joined the People Daily, or the People newspaper at that time. It was a weekly. And there his skills were confirmed, because anybody who said, oh, he was just shining because he was at the Nation, of course, had to shut up forever, because he picked up the People from a very low circulation into very high circulation figures. People in Nairobi used to say, indeed people all over Kenya used to say, gosh, this man must have somebody right inside State House, because he would quote verbatim conversations in the secret corridors of power right inside State House. And the circulation of the People rose dramatically. Yeah, that was before the very bad decision of turning it into a daily was made. And of course nowadays when you hear the People newspaper, to the younger generation Kenya, it means nothing. Now it is very sad, because if you had the old journalists still in our newsroom today, yeah, our newspapers, I guarantee you, would be much more interesting to read. And even with the draconian control of the government and censorship, I guarantee you that a lot of stories would slip by, yeah, Mbugu style, where you print a story. I mean, these guys were just amazing heroes, yeah, because the whole idea was, you print the story, we'll handle the consequences later. What? Yani, be a journalist first, and then a human being, yeah, you know, with the usual feelings and emotions of a human being, like fear of consequences and so on, that comes later. You're a journalist first, and then the consequences later. What? In my view, these were true heroes of Kenya. George Mbugu's was a true hero of the Republic of Kenya. I take off my hat to him. Well, I'm just looking fondly at the good old days, which definitely won't come back. And so the future of the Daily Nation, the newspaper that was once a very great newspaper in our country, yeah, part of our history, it seems will never be the same again. And even if the Kenyatta family don't buy it, another rich person with their own personal interest will buy. And I guarantee you, they can never get another George Mbugu's to be the editor. Very sad. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.